Good evening, and thank you for joining us for one of our final talks in Abu Dhabi Art 2020. I've much been looking forward to this myself. It's an opportunity to hear from our curator, Maya El-Khalil, who's been working with three fantastic artists for Beyond Emerging Artists. And it's been an absolute delight and joy to understand their practice better through this. So I'm so thrilled that they'll be sharing insights into what they've been working on. Beyond Emerging Artists launched in 2017 with Mohammed Kadhim and Christiana Dimarchi, who worked with three artists, and they were followed by Mohammed Ahmed Ibrahim in 2018, and then Rahman and Rokni Herizade and Hissam Rahmanian in 2019. And in each of those instances, we'd invited a very established UAE artist or collective of artists to work and mentor emerging artists and help them in their practice. And I think what was fascinating about that was seeing how they focused on the materiality of the work. So for example, I remember with Hala Idris, who was one of our artists, she went and did vocal lessons in London. Taqwa Nakbi wanted a sort of machine that could recycle paper. And there was a lot of thinking about the materiality of the works and how those more established artists could work with the younger artists and help them with that. What's been interesting this year, it's the first year we've worked with a really established curator, Maya, and she of course has been the director of Afra Gallery. She was for several years, I think 10 years. And after that, went on to curate 2139 in Jeddah with the main show I Love You Urgently, also a show in the Delfina in London. I was always struck by how wonderfully thought and conceived her exhibitions were. I remember one exhibition at Afra during a Jeddah Art Week that really blew me away. And so it was an opportunity to invite her to work with artists in the UAE. And I've seen firsthand, from her days at Afra, how well she works with artists and helps them develop their ideas, and to do it through a curator's lens. And I think what's happened is, which I hope, we'll discover more of today, is a lot of discussion about the ideas behind each artist's works, the narratives, the stories, she's referenced writers and thinkers, whether Khalil Gibran, whether Japanese philosophy in terms of space. And that's been a really important journey for the artists, is thinking, of course, about the materiality of their works, but also about the critical thinking behind it. And I think there she's been really generous in sort of giving them tools with which to think through some of their amazing ideas. Without much further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers today, Maya El-Khalil, the curator, who will be talking about Beyond Emerging Artists 2020, and of course our three amazing emerging artists, who, I think it's important to state, because we were discussing the other day, what is meant by emerging. It's important to state by emerging, it's this idea of critical voices that are emerging out in the contemporary art scene in the UAE today, important voices that have something urgent to say. And it doesn't necessarily mean young or old, it's just someone who has something that challenges boundaries or borders, that pushes against boundaries from within, and that has something relevant for all of us to connect with and understand. And whether that's Hind's sort of almost anthropological look with visual archaeology, whether it's Afra Dhaheri's exploration of sort of memory and social ordering through hair, or Afra Suwaidi's look at memory through the architectures that she's created in her collage. They all do very different things, drawing on the past to think about the present, and to articulate, their perspectives. And I look forward to attending this with everyone else. So thank you very much, Maya, and our wonderful emerging artists. Over to you.
Thank you, Jala. I remember when you asked me, I think it was in mid-January, whether I'd be interested to work with emerging artists for the next edition of Abu Dhabi Art, I said immediately yes. I didn't hesitate. I'm really interested in how art can change the way we look at ourselves, at our culture. And throughout the years working with emerging artists and artists in general, I was always challenged with the way I thought I had acquired knowledge about society, about the many societies I belong to. And so this is, I think this is what young emerging artists or emerging artists give this perspective, this new perspective, this fresh look at how things are changing and changing so fast. Now, the three artists, Afra, Suwaidi, Afra, Dhaheri, and Hind Mezaina, have all quite distinctive practices. When we started working, we didn't think of setting a theme. We were just back and forth trying to understand what they were interested in. And surprisingly, as I said it before, I was surprised to see that it wasn't really looking at the future, especially coming in from a society that is constantly in move, challenging new horizons, swift developments, but more looking at the past and trying to make sense of that past, exploring it, but also dissecting it and understanding the impact that it has today, but also trying to find at sometimes a sort of reconciliation with that past. So, I mean, I think it's, I'd rather hear now from the artist and maybe particularly Hind. Hind, your point of departure was a video that you found online. It was a dance that happened in 1980. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, the video was a clip of a disco competition that took place in London in 1980, and it included a participant from the United Arab Emirates. So that clip went viral, and that was a few years ago. And I've always been thinking about that video. I've and then I tracked the entire episode and I watched it. It's in the British Film Institute, and I've been wondering, what would have happened if, this participant who was announced as Ahmed Sharif, and I'm not necessarily sure what his nationality is, if he had won, what would have happened, how things would have been different today, I don't know. And yeah, like, would there have been national pride, if we had a winner, from the UAE for a disco competition? And subsequently, and with this participation of this emerging artist project, I wanted to kind of go back to that and think about the context of now and representation of nationality, representation of masculinity, what is okay, what isn't okay. And as I was researching, I also found another UAE participant who took part in 1984, and his name was announced, and also his job title, and he was an immigration officer. So I thought also that was interesting, and that started making me think about class as well, and who's allowed to take part in what to represent a country. And with this work, which is a work in progress, work in progress. And I know you wanted us to also kind of focus on the process in this initial phase of exhibiting. I think it's an 8-minute clip of what I think of as notes, right? As kind of like a little, snippets of what I found, snippets of comparisons. I'm comparing disco dancing to heritage dancing. I found stories about dance related, incidents in the UAE, dance representing Khalijis in Bollywood. So I've taken all these clips and put them together, and I'm trying to figure out how to kind of evolve this video. And I've got just a few seconds from these clips that I want to, share with viewers who's joining us. And here is one, which is kind of the opening of this video. And the piece is called A Performance of Valor. So that's kind of the title of the work, which is still an ongoing piece of work I'm working on. So if we can press play.
And representing the United Arab Emirates is Ahmed Sharif, number 30.
United Arab Emirates.
And in the following slides, you'll just see a few other clips, and these are just, again, I'm looking at body movement. I'm trying to think are there similarities, are there differences, how are men represented in these footage? And again, and the entire piece is including stock footage, and it's including, and this example from Bollywood, the top image from a movie called Lakshmi, and the song is called Burj Khalifa. And I was quite amused by, again, this representation of Arabs or Khalijis, and it got me thinking about what the different kind of ways of representing, and what feels, is it okay? Is it emphasizing stereotypes? Is it being playful? A lot of questions that I'm still thinking about and trying to, go through and process with this piece of work. And I think what I also like to say, this is probably, this is an installation shot of what it currently looks like in Manarat, Saadiyat. So if anyone is in Abu Dhabi, go check it out. But it's also, I think, linking to the last video work I did, which is called Dancing Girls. And with that, it was more about looking about female representation in Khaliji, pop culture. And I layered it with a song by Kylie Minogue. So again, I was thinking about movements and how does it work with the song, how over the past maybe 3-4 decades, the change of what these women look like, how they're dressed, and again, representing Khaliji women, right? So to kind of the current music videos where they look completely different to what I at least remember what young girls who are supposed to represent, this part of the world look like on TV, when they're dancing along to the male singer in the background. And the last slide, and this is probably the first video I ever did. So again, this is something over the past 5 years, where photography has been mainly my practice, but I've been thinking a lot about the moving image and incorporating my photography in it. And this was a piece I did for the Artists in Residence for Art Dubai, titled It May Have Been Where the Tales of Sinbad and Aladdin came from. And in general, my work is a lot about kind of my relationship to the city, Dubai, where I'm from, and its changes, its representation in media, how it's being written about, how it's being talked about, how it's being remembered, misremembered. So this is a video where I collated a series of old postcards of Dubai, which represented the creek, because that was kind of the showpiece of the city compared to today, which is Burj Khalifa, for instance. And I layered it with lots of text that I found in articles and stories from social media, and just kind of like a little personal look, but through my voice, but through words found from other sources. So this is kind of a little journey of my work into video, and with this current work, it's still a work in progress, and it's something I've not really done before, where you show publicly a work in progress, but okay. It's also like an experiment to see how people respond to it. So that's my bit.
Thank you, Hind. Yes, I mean, it's quite interesting when we're looking at all these videos. It was fascinating to see, I mean, not only to start by our own reactions to see how things were, how they were interpreted back then, how will they be interpreted now, but also you reinforce that idea of the body acting as a frontier between what's private and what's public, but also what's personal and what's national. This is where stories are being basically juxtaposed. Afra Dhaheri, you also take a component of the body as a frontier, as a site of meaning, the hair. But you also connected to an idea of time, of passing time, of a container of stories. Now, your point of departure is an architectural structure. I don't know whether you want to start with this.
Sure. So, at some point I was trying to, sometime in the summer, I was actually trying to produce a new body of work. And I sort of usually go to my studio and try and see what materials I have. It always starts with a material or a material as maybe an image sometimes. So sometimes I would go out in the city and just look around and start taking photographs of things on the landscape or the cityscape of the city that interests me. In my previous work, the landscape or the cityscape actually represents the development of time. The more that the cityscape grows, or the taller the buildings become, the sort of this is a connotation of the passing of time. This is the register of time. And so I was driving around in Mina, and I saw a spiral staircase that was on a demolished warehouse that had like literally that just one chunk left, and that one chunk was a spiral staircase taking you upstairs to like technically nowhere. And it kind of like really attracted me. I took multiple images of it and I started to draw it. I started to sort of like digest the image. I wanted to know what really interested me in that space. And you look at it and you don't really know if it's something that's being built or being demolished. It's kind of like in an in-between state, which was very interesting to me. So yeah, and then the more I explored the object, the more I explored the spiral staircase, I found myself surrounded by it in many things, but then most importantly, that it actually made me think of hair, and particularly my hair. And so in looking at hair, I've departed from the hair drawings that I produced last year that were shown in Abuظbي Art. And I started to sort of like, I had this urgency where I felt like I wanted to materialize the work even more than like what it exists on a two-dimensional surface. I wanted it to become three-dimensional. So I started exploring ideas of hair, and I started reading Woman Framing Hair. It's a book by Heather Hanna. And in the book, she talks about a lot of different artists who work with hair within their work, or suggestions of hair. And so in trying or attempting to expand the scale of my work with hair, because it started with my using my like strands from my own hair. And it's funny because a lot of people ask me like, do you cut your hair to use it? And I do not cut my hair to use it. I allow my hair to take its natural course of the life cycle, and it falls, and I collect it in my shower. And there's a ritual in that, you know, a ritual in, you know, taking care of the hair on your head and carrying the weight of that hair, and then you know, collecting it after it actually comes off the head, and then like collecting it and detangling those bundles of hair one at a time and applying it in my work. And so there's a very much like a ritual in it. So in this work, I looked at the rope, and I felt like the rope can actually represent the hair. And for a while I was working with Maya and talking to her about the different explorations I've been doing with rope. And I wasn't convinced that how can I say that rope represents hair? I can't say that rope represents hair. Like, it does not make sense. How can I make it make sense? And I realized that I have to treat it like hair. I have to start treating the hair, the rope as hair, in order for it to start to embody that character, for it to start acting like hair. And it did. And I started trimming it. I started braiding it, and casting it was one of the moments where I was diving into like the meaning of hair. So looking at hair of living meaning, yes. So like, what can the hair say? What can it represent? And I know, and I'm very well aware that it represents a lot of different things in different cultures, but I think in a particular culture that I live in, I came across this quote in the book that talks about how veiling the hair, for example, blurs the lines between absence and presence. And so that became very interesting to me. And I started casting the hair in these molds, which are very geometric molds. And then, so casting the rope there and then taking it out and exploring that after sort of like result or after image of looking at the rope without the mold, but you can still see the mold. The mold no longer exists, but you can see its impact on the rope. You can see that. And I feel like when we look at our own hair, you think about hair, it has a capacity to hold memory. It has a capacity to memorize. And there's a simple example that I talk about, is like when you take a shower and sleep on one side of your head, wake up in the morning and your hair is stuck on one side. So it kind of like has that capacity to remember, but it remembers momentarily, it remembers temporarily. So there's temporality to this kind of like holding form. And in this work, to detangle, I'm trying to like detangle, deconstruct come out of the mold and like sort of, you know, slowly smooth these molded kind of like areas. Yeah.
Beautiful. What's the role of the pedestal in showing your work, Afra? How do you relate to that? Because there's a very natural flow, and there's lightness. It's as if it's part. I mean, it's not part of the work, but it is. It complements it, and it's important to you, because even in the studio, you use different types of how you show your work is very important.
I mean, I feel like in this particular show, there was this idea of thinking of it, thinking of her as time, and there's a process at walking through it. And I wanted this lightness to exist. I wanted the work to feel like it can sort of rest on something. And in resting, you can see the way that the rope is placed. It's actually using sort of this light pedestal or plinth as a support. So there's almost as if this, it becomes part of the work and supporting it, but also like embracing its form.
Yes, absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit of this tasrih that is, I mean, it's already at a different scale, and I think this is one of the work that you really experimented with extensively, and then you had to rebuild it completely on site in a different format.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started working with this piece in my studio at a much smaller scale. It was the scale of my studio. So it was like 3 meters high. I did not have that vast sort of like circumference to work around it as well, but I was able to kind of like work with the ropes and experiment with braiding it. It took a lot of different forms. So it started as a whole braid, escalating down from the ceiling, and then I wasn't like, it wasn't enough for me, it wasn't laborious enough to kind of like represent or convey the idea that I'm talking about, or the sort of like endurance that I'm talking about that is carried by, you know, the connotation of hair. And so I started braiding it in different ways and different shapes and forms. So in arriving to this space, I knew that I wanted to scale up the work. And that was the whole point, is like sort of like you're prepping for a marathon, right? So you keep, you know, running every day to develop your endurance. And so when I came to Manarat Saadiyat to install it, we installed it at a 6 meter high, and I had to be on a crane to actually braid it. And there's an interesting moment when I was up there braiding on the top. I actually felt like I was experiencing the narrative or the ideas that I'm talking about on a much greater scale, in a much powerful force or energy. I was up there and I was braiding the top, and because the ropes are so long down, that I was braiding from the top and it was tangling from the bottom as I was working. And I had 2 assistants in the bottom that were detangling it. And I went back home and I was talking to my mother and I said, Mom, this happened and it was so interesting. I was braiding from the top and it was tangling from the bottom. And she said, this is nothing new to me. It's not something unfamiliar. This reminds me of when we had to deal with your hair when you were a kid. I had very long hair. And every time my mom would like comb my hair or like just style it for me, it's a whole process that includes 2 or 3 people, where she would comb the top and someone would hold the bottom and things like that. So and these, I feel like these are kind of like the narratives that I was embodying myself in, but also considering the weight of the hair, the weight of the female hair. It carries a lot of weight, not only weight as a scale, as a number, but like weight on it in its connotations, weight on its representations, and what hair represents in our culture. And I feel like we've created that idea. Hair in our culture is actually an intimate body part. However, it exists outside the body part.
Sorry to interrupt you, but before we move to Hind, I want to ask you one question. because of all these memories that you shared with me and the connotation and the meaning that there, is this why, I mean, what's the meaning of scale? What's the perfect scale? Is there a perfect scale for you? Is this why you wanted this piece to be scaled up?
I wanted to embrace the hair. I wanted to celebrate it. So I wanted to.
Is there a perfect scale, or is it?
Is it a perfect scale?
Is there a perfect scale for you? I mean, is there?
I don't think
just being big.
No, I think it has to be like I actually was thinking I wanted it to be at least 2 or 3 times the human scale. Because I wanted it to be grand. I wanted encountering it and the viewer facing the work. I want them to feel like this presence, you know, this presence of something that is very much, yani, you can see all the labor that went into it. And I think the labor and the ritual is very important. And I put myself in that position where I had to endure the weight, I had to endure the labor, I had to endure the ritual. And there's all of this that we endure on daily basis, but, you know, this time it's, you know, it's escalated, it's exaggerated because, you know.
Talking about scale, Hind, we're talking about a different scale altogether. Sorry, Afra Suwaidi, I mean. Afra, we're talking about a different scale altogether. Here you are going back to fragments of memory. You are building your work with, you use collage and building pieces, fragments that you took from the past and from everything around you that reminds you of that past. So you use photograph, patches of textile, plastic, you scrapped, you glued, you burnt. Why?
So basically in my work, I was trying to tackle the issue of abuse and how it can affect a person. And in my work, I was trying to reconstruct fragments of memories, exploring memories as a way to question the notion of time and how trauma appears in domestic architectures and everyday surroundings. So in my work, I used, as you said, textile, personal belongings, and lots of stuff. I used, I had like photographs of real buildings and راس القيمة and القيوين and الشارجة and أبوظبي to like just to show like the reality. This is our society. This is our architecture. Like, and I was trying to show what's behind those scenes, what's behind those architectures, and so basically in the work that I'm showing, it is like a scene of an insider, or like a look from an insider to look like what are these things, what are happenings behind those closed doors. I scratched paper just to show the emotions that or like the suffer and those certain people. I scratched paper, I burned some paper, burned some plastic. I used a very aggressive style of stitching basically, and just to show the feelings out of people who went through sexual abuse basically, and it is a sensitive subject to talk about in our region in here. So I'm trying to like, as a first step, I'm trying to address the idea or like the subject to our people, to our society. It is not a shameful thing to talk about it. You don't have to pity the person who gets through that situation basically. What we should, as a society, as a community, to empower those women and not to look at them and a lack of pity, but like to support them basically.
Can we have a close-up of one of your work? Perfect. do you want to talk a little bit how you layer these work? Some of
so basically the process of layering the work, as first I used papers, and then after the papers, if I didn't like it, I deconstruct it, and then I rebuilt it again, like just to have this aggression or like aggressive feeling towards the paper. I tore some paper, I as I said, I burnt some papers. The textile, I tore them in a very like aggressive way, just like to show the feeling out of it from someone who's inside those households.
Afra, when do you decide when a work is finished?
When I feel like it's finished. So basically I have a scenery in my mind, and then like when I find like when I work and then like I find like I should stop here, like it's all comes naturally, like when should I stop, like someday.
That's not true. You tell me a work and then you tell me it's finished, and then 2 days later I see that this work has been layered again and changed again, and you kept changing and layering and changing and layering, and it's it's fascinating. I've been fascinated following how you progressed through really building these stories inside your work. I mean, you were gathering stories from society around you, but I feel there's such an emotional involvement in these stories that is reflected in your work. And so when did you stop only when we had to show the work?
No, to be honest, as I said, like, okay, constructing the work, and then like I leave it for a while, and then when I come back to it, I feel like it's not done yet. And then like it is the process of like keeping it, staying away from the work, and like then coming back to it. It is tricky, and somehow like sometimes like the day that I work with this piece, like I feel like I'm done with it, and then like the next day when I come back, I feel like there is something needs to be done in here. And then like it is, I don't know, it is tricky like to decide when it should be finished, but it's all about the process and like the sceneries that you have in your mind, basically.
Okay, I'm going to talk to this. I'm going to build on this idea of working and reworking a work, and actually the whole process of presenting work that is in progress. I think we struggled with that idea at the beginning, and in a way it's because we started so late. We were debating with Diala whether should we have emerging artists beyond emerging artists this year, or should we postpone it? And then we decided that it's quite important, even within the context of the pandemic and everything that's happening, to actually go ahead. And we discussed with you the idea of presenting work that is still in progress, that is where the process of developing that work becomes visible throughout the length of the exhibition, and whether maybe also engage the public with that process. So Hind, I want to know how did you feel? Because I think it's not easy. It's never easy to put yourself out there. We're all geared to work towards perfection, or to give the best of ourselves. And then suddenly you are asked here to actually present work that is not finished to a very wide public. It's already so difficult to be an artist. So how did you deal with this, and what do you expect from this process?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's absolutely true. And I think I took it up as a challenge, and it's also, I think, thanks to you. Like, I really enjoyed our discussion, and I had faith in, your trust in me, and I trusted you. And so I think that played a big part. It's not something I would normally have, said yes to be honest with you. I would have still said, no, I need to be left alone to kind of figure it out. And, but I said, like, let me get out of my comfort zone. I mean, this whole pandemic has obviously impacted everyone in different ways and levels, right? So, and you came at a time when I needed to start thinking about work because I hadn't been making any work like for many months. And so you played a big role in letting me just try something and get out of my comfort zone. And then this whole idea of, yeah, showing something that's still a thinking in public, it's still a work in progress, and the opportunity to, yeah, maybe see how people respond to it and get their kind of feedback or a reaction to it. And already I think in the past week, you know, since it's been out, there has been interesting side comments or discussions, you know, shared with me and publicly. So yeah, but I also, I feel, yeah, and I always have to kind of, I feel like I need to emphasize that it's still work in progress. This is not the finished work, right? Because I think, again, a lot of people are just used to anything in exhibition mode, right? That it means it's the final work. So I think it's also something I'm sure the public or, you know, anyone interested in the arts is not necessarily used to seeing work in progress, because they think, okay, wait, it's up there, it means it's finished. So yeah, so in that sense, it's something, like I said, it's new, but it's also, it's because there was this trust between the two of us, and there was faith, and, you know, you kind of nudged me and you pushed me, and, you know, so that played a big role, because like I said, it's something I probably wouldn't have done. And through this process is, yeah, kind of figuring out how I want, what is the finished work, what do I want it to look like, how will it be. And I think we've talked this between us, where I said, you know, these feel like notes, and I want the end to feel like an essay, right? So, but like a visual essay of some sort. So I'm hoping that's something I can achieve in the coming months, and an opportunity for people to see it in its current form of exhibition, and hopefully opportunities where else it can be shown.
Talking about the public, how do you see the role of the public? What's more important, the professional critic or the public? Afra, Dhaheri. Oh, sorry, Hind, please go ahead.
Okay. I think the public maybe more. I mean, from a professional critic, would be good to hear, you know, professional opinions, you know, like in the context of how this fits in the contemporary art world, how does it fit historically? These would be things I would be interested in hearing from you know, professional critics. Public would be maybe the most important thing, because again, a lot of work I do is about here, for here, and how do people respond to it? Do people get it? Are we on the same wavelength? Are we not on the same wavelength? You know, do people have anything more to add to it? So that's, I think, something I'm interested in, and not just, you know, oh, this is really cool, or oh, I'm being nostalgic, because I've had that where people just think it's a nostalgic trap, but it's like, no, I'm trying to interrogate something, I'm trying to question something. I want people to question things, you know, so that's also part of what I'm trying to do with this work. Whether I'm successful or not in the end, you know, time will tell, but I'm very much interested in a more public involvement, you know, and not just, oh, look, oh, this was a fun, this is quirky, you know, this made me smile kind of reaction.
Absolutely, yes. Dhaheri, what's more important for you?
The public or what? Sorry.
Or the professional critic?
I mean, I think the professional critics are always important, but I think we can't like separate the public from the critics. I think, you know, hearing from professionals is important because, you know, as artists in our studios, we're always self-critical, but hearing from fresh eyes, hearing from fresh voices, I think that it's important because sometimes they point out things that you do not really think about or not consider. Sometimes we're very critical on ourselves in the studio that we miss important parts that we kind of like, you know, descale and then, you know, magnify and exaggerate on things that are less important. But I think that for me, particularly in this work, I'm very interested in the public's opinion and what they think, how they relate, or how, what kind of feelings does the work evoke? I mean, apart from it, the scale is massive, so it instantly kind of like takes you on a journey of some sort. But then like, I am very curious to hear like what it evokes in people, what it makes them think of, what it reminds them of. And I think that those are, it's a work, it deals with a lot of social and cultural, you know, constructs and ideas, inherent ideas. And I feel like it is in its context, you know, it's in its audience, and I'm very curious to know how people feel about that.
Afra, Afra Suwaidi, the public is extremely important for you because you're dedicating your work to the public. What are you expecting from this period of interaction between launching the work, starting with the exhibition, the art fair, and the end of the exhibition, end of December, which you talked about, you know, inviting people into groups and opening up discussions, programming around the issues of abuse. And
to be honest, like regarding to invite people and stuff, I just started today to email some organizations and or like institutions just to come as a group, and like we can have a discussion about like whatever it is the subject it is. But to me, the public opinions, I think, is more important, because I am trying to address this issue in here, like whereas our people, our society try so hard to dodge this subject, and it's awkward to talk about this subject out loud, and it is because of our culture, because of our people, like they won't understand it, they won't take it, I don't know, maybe seriously. They'll have lots of walls in front of you before you have this normal discussion, like you can't talk about it loudly. And I'm trying just to ease the way that we talk about it, you know, like just to talk about it, like to have the ability to talk about it freely. And I'm trying to have people's opinion in here to basically, I have lots of people coming in my studio, some of them young, some of them old, and male and females. Like some of people, like the younger generation, the females, they are like, they love the idea, they are like supporting the idea itself. Some people try to dodge it, and some people like try to not have this conversation, you know, and like they didn't want to hear it either. So it is like this research, it is important by itself. And
absolutely.
And yeah, I am trying to do something, and like developing the idea of making community or a group of people and talk about it.
I was touched by a quote that you used, talking about sources of inspiration. You quoted a passage from the Prophet by Khalil Gibran on children. He said, "You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow." Why did you use this quote?
So basically, I was into this quote cause, and somehow it relates to the work that I have, to my work basically. And it is about people giving birth to a child, and then like they grew it up to a certain level, and then after that level, like the parents shouldn't worry about that kid, because this kid, he'll have his own personality, he'll be independent. So basically he wants to break free from the parenting wing basically. So and my work, it is about that, because there is lots of situations, lots of stories, like the parents couldn't save their child from the abuse, so they should give them the freedom, and like they shouldn't worry about you know, their own creation.
And thank you, Afra. And who were you inspired by when you were doing your research? Whose work did you look at?
I mean, with this specific work, like it's not necessarily I'm inspired by some, you know, like an artist or an artwork, but I think I'm more inspired by the format, the video essay, which So kind of in the world of film academics or cinephiles, you know, there's a video essay where it's a form of like almost like film criticism or film analysis done, you know, and some people do it beautifully, and you know, where they take kind of clips from movies or talk about themes or kind of comparing old and new films or looking at specific actors or themes. And, you know, so I like that format very much. And I mean, the two kind of that stand out in that field for me anyway, and they're quite well known in their profession, are Catherine Grant and Kevin B. Lee, you know, and I'm always interested in how they think about cinema and the moving image and the work they do, and I invite, you know, viewers to look up their names and look at their videos online. So I think I'm more inspired by that. It's kind of the format, and you know, and there are people I really admire, and I always kind of like, you know, follow their, you know, if they do any talks or present something, and I've had the opportunity to meet them in person as well. So I think, like I said, I think it's more, I was very drawn to that format, you know, and I feel like it's a format that is very accessible, and there's a lot that can be done with it.
But you're also a what you call a cinephile, right? You program you program film sessions. You also worked at one point with the Sharjah Art Foundation. Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I mean, I do spend a lot of time in cinema. Some people think it's quite unhealthy, but you know, it's my, you know, it's the love of my life and my coping mechanism in life. Yeah, movies and moving images, like, you know, it's kind of almost like a lifestyle. You know, people go to the gym every day. Like I make sure, you know, I'm watching a movie every day. Yeah, and I think with film programming also plays a role because it is about thinking about themes and ideas and presenting them, I think, to a public in a way that maybe they wouldn't have thought about before. And, you know, and I've had opportunities to program film screenings for Louvre Abu Dhabi, where a lot of the screenings were always tied in with an exhibition or with, you know, specific artwork. And I find it a very enriching exercise personally. And I do believe it, I think it's very, you know, I think that the public responds to it as well, you know, so it's a new way of thinking about work or kind of thinking about things from different angles instead of just kind of like the traditional way of something is being presented. So yeah, anytime there's an opportunity to think about, you know, what kind of movies to put together, you know, whether it's a double bill or to group it as a theme, you know, I feel it's a great way to kind of easily open up discussions. Maybe that could be hard, like, you know, Afra Suwaidi's work, right? Like it's extremely, it's difficult topics. I feel there's a way where even if, you know, you think of certain movies and it'll be an easy, open, you know, kind of a gateway to kind of even get into these topics, you know? So I think it all kind of helps complement different ways of thinking about artwork, and yeah, and the moving image to me is like kind of my personal favorite, and yeah, and so that always plays a role, right? It's always kind of thinking about visuals and you know, something that looks cinematic, feels cinematic. Yeah, so that.
I mean, today more and more we're talking about interdisciplinary approach to art. So working with other disciplines, but not only in terms of collaboration, but it's actually more bringing in art, science, philosophy. And does this infuse your practice today? Are there collectives in the UAE that are working in this interdisciplinary manner? Afra, Dhaheri, you are also a lecturer at the university. I mean, how do you interact? I mean, as artists, is it a bubble? Is it or is it really, are you reaching out to collaborate across?
You mean in my own practice? Like if I
in your own practice and in the practice of other artists in the UAE today? Talking about collectives, but
I mean, I'm part of a collective. You know, I'm one of the co-founding members of Bait 15, which is an artist-run space, studio spaces and exhibition space, where 4 artists who work. We are a collective. We don't work collectively. Each one of us have their own practice, but we practice within the same premises. So I think that idea of having artists working within the same space is very important, because it kind of like, I don't remember, there was like this text that I've read some while ago, and it talks about like education by infection. So talking about how when you're in a community, when you're in a circle of people working together, you kind of also teach each other, and you kind of like infect each other with what you read, with what you've encountered in work, with what you produce, materials you've learned. So we learn a lot from being around each other. And I think that discussions open up. I mean, one of the ideas when I was talking about weight and how women are bearers of cultural weight, Zuhur Rasayagh was side by side working for a piece on a piece for Jamil, the youth assembly, and she was also talking about a similar topic, and we kind of like had that discussion, which made us arrive at this, just calling it, you know, women are bearers of cultural weight. And so I think that these are important. We don't have to necessarily work collectively, but even just working in the same space actually infuses that.
But are there collectives? I mean, do you see in the UAE more interdisciplinary approach? I mean, people like science coming hand in hand with artists, with philosophers, obviously with filmmakers, performance. I mean, how? I
think it existed. I think it existed. I mean, you talk about collectives and maybe think of like, you know, the pioneers who started, like Muhammad Ahmed Ibrahim, Hassan Sharif. They were all kind of like collectively always talking. And we think about مثلا amazing artist Nujum Al-Ghanem, who's also like, you know, a filmmaker, but she's also an artist. Her husband Khalid Al-Budur is a poet who is always working side by side with artists. We have Adil Khuzam, who's a writer and a poet who actually dedicates a lot of his time talking to artists and writing about their practices. I think he contributed to the like writing of some of most important like historical moments in the first generation of artists in the UAE. And I feel like that had already existed in the UAE. If we ask about, are there any collective today? I think there are. And I can give you a few names if you want.
Now, I'm just interested as how often do you find yourself in environments like this? Afra Suwaidi, for instance. Have you found yourself in an environment where you are interacting with people from different disciplines? And I mean, you're in a residency now. Is it a residency exclusively for artists, or are there residents from other disciplines?
It is for artists, and the environment in here, like we always have sessions of critique, and I had so many visitors in here come and I show them my work, and like they give me a critique. Some of them like people still at the university, some of them graduates, and like I really get good feedback from them, like as a community, people that I don't know. So we do have this sort of thing in here, I believe.
You are at a residency now at the Cultural Foundation, Abu Dhabi, right?
Yes.
Is it? I want to refer to a talk, actually, to a discussion that happened on Tuesday, also as part of the Abu Dhabi Art program, between Simon Jamy and Chris Durkan. I don't know whether any of you watched it, but at one point, Simon Jamy was saying that I want to give the youth the tools to tell their own story, to be able to spell the I. To which Chris Durkan replied, I'm not interested in artists expressing themselves. I want them to be more ambitious. So what Simon Jamy was referring to, and Chris Durkan with this I, is basically, it's for the artist to say that I know where I am, I know what's happening in the world, I know what's happening in my country, and to challenge these premises, for artists to ask themselves, what can I produce, according to Simon Jamy, in the world that's going to break something? I'm not going to ask you what did you break with the work that you submitted to. I'm going to ask you, what are you trying to build?
I think what I'm trying to do, or at least what I'm always questioning, or kind of what I think about and I'm trying to resolve is I think this notion of memory and history. I think this place is, and maybe specific to Dubai because I see more of it, you know, like kind of this constant dialogue of this place is new, you know, like it's always kind of positioned as it's not you know, there's no history, there's no legacy. And whether it's in the art, whether it's in any other field, you know, there's always kind of, oh, this is the first, this is the new, and always ignoring what has come before, right? And there's never about building onto anything. So these are some of the things that bother me. And also I think how we're always presented as we're like a monolith group, you know, like we're all the same, we're all think the same. And, you know, whether that's how we're perceived by, you know, the rest of the world, or sometimes even I think how this place presents itself as well. So also kind of challenge that, because, you know, it's a diverse society, which I think also doesn't get acknowledged or get celebrated enough. And so I think through these works and you talk about, you know, how you were surprised that all three of us were thinking about the past, because there's still a lot of the past has not been 100% resolved. There's a lot of the past that isn't known, that isn't documented, that isn't recorded. And as artists, I think we find ways to interrogate that, to bring that, to pull it into the present. And yes, this is a place that's always projecting and talking about the future. And to me, it's like, wait, what about now? What's happening now? What can we fix now? And through artwork, through writings, through, you know, discuss, through all the different things I do, all of these themes are all constantly in my head. And it's interesting, these quotes you mentioned from the stock, which I'm sorry I missed out on, and I'll try to see if it's online. You know, I think it's a good way. Yeah, this kind of, I think it's important maybe for all of artists to think about that. Yeah, what are we doing to challenge something, right? Instead of, you know, I want to make something good, I want to make something that sells, I want to make something, you know, that looks pretty, but what is it doing that's challenging, I think, something. So yeah, so it's good to hear, you know, I feel like that's a good point to keep in mind, I think, all the time about everything we do.
I agree, absolutely. What do you think, Afra, Dhaheri? Would you like me to repeat the quote, or what is it that you're trying to break, or what is it that you're trying to build? And we describe art as being disrupted, the importance of art, its ability to disrupt.
Yeah, but I think, I mean, I feel like I'm in the process of a lot of like unlearning in my studio. I think there's a lot of moments of realizations and understanding how I was brought up and how I was raised versus how the culture or society around me function. I think it's a big question. I don't think I can answer it today and say like, oh yeah, I figured out what exactly I want to say. I think I'm learning, but I do know that I've become much more conscious of my surroundings. And I think what Simone Jami was talking about when he talked about, for example, the I am and understanding the international, understanding what's happening in the West, understanding what's happening here. I think this is something that I do employ in the work, and I do understand that my work speaks. Some people might think that it speaks for a Western audience, but I don't think that is fair, because I think that the work functions on a universal language. I think that using scale or rope in a minimalistic approach, for example, or, you know, I was educated in the West. I don't think that, and I agree with Hind when she says like, this is a very diverse place that is not much celebrated. And I think we have to embrace the fact that, yeah, we did learn from the West and we came here. I am producing my work here. I was asked a lot when I was in Providence and moving for very few months in New York before I moved back. I was asked by a lot of my artist friends there, like, why wouldn't you stay in New York, for example? I had a solo show in Boston, and so a lot of my friends were like, it does not make sense. Why won't you stay in New York? And I felt like my context is here. The audience that I'm trying to speak to is here. But does that mean that my work won't function in an international setting? I don't think so.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very happy. We're very lucky to have you back. Afra, Suwaidi, you definitely said, I am here. I know what's happening in my society, and I want to wake up this mood today, and I want to disrupt it, and I want to break it. What do you want to build?
I do believe that. I hope that I broke the silence.
Yes.
And I hope to not to build, but like to help those women, like the woman who is in need to talk, like to talk to someone basically, and you know, through my art, through my, I don't know, I just, yeah, I want to help those girls who's in need.
Hades, it's been fantastic to work with you. It's really been a privilege for me. And I hope that I look forward to seeing many, many more achievements by the three of you. Thank you for Abu Dhabi Art to have invited me to work alongside you. And thank you for our audience to have listened to us today and to have stayed with us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Abu Dhabi Art. Thank you, Afra and Afra.
Thank you.